Let's take a look at a few examples of how we process visual stimuli. This is a famous illusion, and as I mentioned in a previous video, the existence of illusions kind of reinforces that our brain can easily be tricked by various things. There are tons of illusions that are out there. People try to study them and try to figure out, well, why we actually experience these illusions. This is a famous one called the Hermann grid, and one that you have to understand. The actual explanation is very, very complex. I'm going to try to give it to you, but I want you to understand the significance of this. So what you should be noticing when you're looking at this is the intersections look kind of gray. But if I stare directly at an intersection, so just look in this area, if you stare directly at that intersection, it doesn't look gray. It doesn't look gray. It looks just normally white. But if you just look at the diagram in general, like stare, for example, right here, if you stare at this section right here, then you should be perceiving that the rest of the intersections, well, all the intersections actually look gray. So what's happening is this is something that your brain does to help you kind of see outlines more clearly. It creates a halo around objects so you can better perceive, I don't know, targets or threats. And what it does is when you're looking at an edge of something and you have a very dark area and it's surrounded by white, what will happen is your brain actually makes a kind of even more bright area surrounding that outline. So it kind of makes it stand out. So if it's a person coming down the street and they're coming against a light background or even a not so light background, you're able to kind of pick that out a lot more clearly. So that's the significance of this. So keep the significance of the whole thing in mind and don't get too bogged down by the details about it, even though I'm going to try to explain that here. So here's another diagram showing the same thing. Same effect. You should be seeing grayed out corners right here. But if you stare directly at an intersection like where A is, which we're going to mention, it doesn't actually look gray. If you stare right here, it's not going to look gray. And the reason is because when you stare at this point here, so when you're staring here, it's actually, there's some light parts that are around it. So some light parts that are around it, it doesn't tell, your brain is thinking, oh, that's not much of an edge because there's some bright stuff around it, so I'm not going to perceive that as any different. But when I look somewhere else, for example, at point B, so in one of these lanes here, when I look at one of these lanes, my brain says, okay, this point right here is surrounded by a lot of darkness. So your brain is actually making this appear more white than it actually is. But you can't really perceive that unless you compare it to other parts. So this actually appears to be more white. And how can you tell? Because these corners are actually starting to look gray. Gray means less white. So when I stare here, the other corners, all the intersections all look gray. Are you following? It's a little bit complex, but because this part here has more of an edge, your brain is trying to enhance that, and it's enhancing the edges, and as a result, the corners, which have more white around them and less darkness around them, actually appear to be darker. Alright, that's it. If you understood that, then you could probably just move on, but I'm going to give you the rest of this anyways. So what's happening is, when a small spot of light shines on the retina, the ganglions may increase or decrease the number of impulses depending on where the light shines. So try to look at and study this diagram really quickly. This is what your brain is doing to help enhance these edges. Basically, if light is falling, so if you look at a point like A, if light is falling in the center where you're staring and also around, then it's not doing any extra firing. Therefore, it's not going to enhance this actual color here. But if you're looking at a dark point here, there's a lot of light falling on the point where you're actually staring. But there's not a lot of light falling on the edges around it because it's dark. And so as a result, there's more firing happening. And so this is being enhanced. More firing. It says, hey, look, it's bright, it's bright, it's bright, it's bright, it's bright. And the more that fires, because this is dark around, the more these other parts look gray because they're surrounded by more white. So when I stare at the corner directly again, I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, when I stare at this intersection A right here, since there's a lot of light around from this edge, from here, and from here, your ganglion firing is being canceled out. It's saying, okay, we're not going to fire those ones in the center as actively because there's light landing around the side right there. So it's a balance of excitatory in the center and inhibitory responses that are telling you whether you should do extra firing or not. So this is called edge enhancement. Specifically, this is called lateral inhibition. Edge enhancement by lateral inhibition. It's basically creating a halo of contrast around. It helps us to pick out some things from their backgrounds. When staring at A, excitatory photoreceptors stimulated, I've said this already, but because of the white lines around it, some inhibitory photoreceptors also receive light, so there's less firing. When glancing at a line at point B, right here, only a few of the inhibitory receptors will receive light because it's mostly surrounded by darkness, and so that edge actually gets enhanced, so it looks brighter than A, for example. So that's why you still see these gray spots. Well, I'm going crazy seeing all these gray spots. I'm seeing gray spots over here as well too. That's from retinal burn. How poor are our human eyes? Like, all these problems. When focusing on a spot, we use photoreceptors from fovea. The receptive areas are smaller, so the gray spots disappear, as we've talked about. Okay, that's the Hermann grid. So go look at all the other illusions that are out there and see if you can figure them out. This one's really well understood. Some of them are still perceivable, some of the other illusions that are out there, but they don't have explanations as fully understood as something like this. And one more way that we process information. If you look at this diagram, take a look at this eye right here. Okay, this particular eye, if you look at the optic nerve actually splits into, so this is just from one eye. Part of the information gets processed in the right side of the brain, and some of it gets processed in the left side of the brain. And same goes true for the other eye, that some of the information gets processed in the left, and some of it gets processed in the right. And as a result, we are much better at figuring out distances and sizes, right? So when we're standing somewhere with this binocular vision, we can actually determine if things are closer or farther away. Like when I look at the moon versus I don't know, a house, I can tell which one is smaller, and my brain processes that, but I also know which one is further away, so I don't get confused and think that the moon is as big as a building or something like that. So that's basically what this is saying. Information from the right side of the visual field is processed by the left hemisphere of the brain, as well as the right side. This is per eyeball, okay, per eyeball. So each eyeball's optic nerve actually splits into the left and the right. And that's just an extra little fact about how we perceive information and process it.